Good evening, I'm Erin Burnett, and we are following the breaking news. Sources telling CNN that the former FBI director Jim Comey wrote a memo stating that President Donald Trump asked him to end the investigation into the former National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn. Comey apparently so appalled by the February 14th request that he documented the conversation in this memo. Now, according to Comey's memo, which was first reported by the New York Times, the president said this, and I'm quoting Comey in the memo. Comey says the president said, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." The White House responding tonight saying, quote, "The president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn." This is perhaps the most explosive revelation yet in Trump's short tenure as president. I want to go to Jake Tapper first, our reporters here breaking this news. And Jake, what else are you learning about what happened in that room on February 14th between the president and Jim Comey?
Pamela Brown and I each have spoken to sources that confirmed the existence of this memo. The source I spoke with has a copy of the memo. He's a source close to Comey, and he tells me that on February 14th, Director Comey, then still the FBI director, was in the Oval Office with President Trump and Vice President Pence and the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, talking about an issue of national security or the law. After that meeting was over, the president asked the Vice President and the Attorney General to leave the room. And then, according to this memo, Comey said, as you read, that the president said to him, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go." He told Comey that Flynn had not done anything wrong. This is the day after Flynn had resigned. Now, Comey kept a record of this, as is characteristic for him. People who have followed Comey's career for the last couple decades know that often when there is a controversy, Comey is somebody in the center of the storm who has written a contemporaneous account of what was going on at the time and what he was thinking and advocating at the time. This happened during the Bush years when he was Deputy Attorney General, and he did this during the U.S. Attorney firing scandal or controversy, during the NSA wiretapping, and then during the debate over torture. In any case, the source says to me, by the way, and this is important, Aaron, that there are he says, quote, "He wrote a number of memos. A great many, if not all, were about contacts with Trump, particularly the ones that made him feel uneasy." Now, I said to him, does Comey think that this was obstruction of justice, what President Trump said to him about ending the investigation? And the source said, well, that's your language, not mine. But he agreed with the fact that Comey's impression was the president was telling him to end the investigation.
Obviously, an incredibly significant development tonight. As we said, perhaps the biggest thus far in the Russia investigation. Thank you, Jake. And I want to go to Pamela out front in Washington. Pamela, you did confirm this story for us here at CNN. Someone has read to you these memos. And I guess the big question is we're starting to see different parts of them. Are we going to see them? Are we going to see everything that Jim Comey thought about the February 14th meeting and these other meetings or calls that, as Jake said, made him feel, quote unquote, uneasy?
That's the big question right now, and there's already rhetoric on Capitol Hill coming from Democratic senators and congressmen in particular, saying that they want to subpoena these memos from James Comey. It is clear from my source and from Jake Tapper's sources that he's been speaking to that James Comey felt it was important to document some of these conversations that he had with President Trump. And this one in particular, I'm told through my source, a person familiar with the matter, that he was appalled by the fact that he believed the way he perceived it was President Trump asking him to end the probe into Michael Flynn, the embattled former national security advisor. And so he felt for ethical reasons, legal reasons, it was important to document this. And he apparently shared it with close associates, with people, senior people in the FBI. But the question remains, outside of that, who knew? Did the Department of Justice know? Who in the Department of Justice might have known? Of course, Andy McCabe, the now acting director of the FBI, as you'll recall, Aaron, testified last week on Capitol Hill and said that there is no indication that the White House has tried to interfere in the Russia investigation. Of course, the argument could be made that this is interference with the president asking him to end that probe, but it's unclear if Andy McCabe even knew if this memo existed. So still some unanswered questions at this hour, Aaron.
And obviously the answers to those questions could be some of the most important here in presidential history as we look at the significance of this story. Sarah Murray is out front at the White House. And Sarah, the response from the Trump administration, defiant.
defiant. They are basically denying that this conversation ever exists. And Aaron, I think it's important to note a little bit of background here that publicly administration officials have said the president wants the Russia investigation to go on. I believe he said that in an interview, but privately we know that the president was stewing about the fact that all anyone could talk about was Russia before he made this decision to fire James Comey. So in a statement tonight responding to this bombshell report, the White House said, a senior administration official said, the president has repeatedly expressed his view that General Flynn is a decent man who served and protected our country. The president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn. The president has the utmost respect for our law enforcement agencies and all investigations. This is not a truthful or accurate portrayal of the conversations between the president and Mr. Comey. But I can tell you, Aaron, that tonight people close to the president and even some staffers are sort of accepting this with kind of a grim reality, saying they don't really know what to make of it and they're waiting to see what comes of it. I think that gives you a good indication of sort of how people are feeling after really weeks of chaos have racked the White House, Aaron.
All right, Sarah Murray, thank you very much. And our panel on this massive story tonight, Jeffrey Toobin, former federal prosecutor Paul Callan, former prosecutor Chris Swecker, who was former assistant FBI director for the Criminal Investigative Division. He knows Jim Comey. Tony Blinken, the former deputy secretary of state, deputy national security advisor under President Obama. Gloria Borger, our chief political analyst, and Mark Preston, all with me. Jeff, let me start with you. You know, I think people watching have come to now say, well, there's always something. Okay,
Yes,
okay. But in the context of there being something on a 1 and something on a 10, this one is significant.
Well, this is very high because if the report is true and if the memo that Comey described accurately described what went on, that seems clearly to be obstruction of justice. This is a pending investigation. In February 14th, everybody knew that the FBI was investigating Michael Flynn for his role in the Trump campaign, whether he made false statements, whether he participated in colluding with the Russian government. And if Donald Trump says to him, let it go, says to Comey, let it go, the only interpretation I can make is that he's telling him to shut down in the investigation. And I think Jake Tapper made a very important point about the context here. There was a meeting in the Oval Office about national security. Trump asks Sessions and Pence, the Attorney General and the Vice President, to leave.
Right. Again, this is according to Comey.
Again, that suggests consciousness of guilt. You don't want to ask for something improper in front of other people. We need to see the memos, and of course the great question is, are there tapes? Because President Trump suggested there were White House tapes. That could certainly, I mean, Congress has to ask for all the underlying documentation.
So, Chris, you know Jim Comey. Does this sound like something he would do to keep this sort of a memo? And what would you say about its accuracy from what you know of him?
Well, it's definitely something that agents do. It's something that lawyers do. I was trained on it. If you don't document it, it didn't happen. And I can definitely see former Director Comey documenting very contemporaneously as possible, probably right after the meeting, and it would be sound judgment to do that. I know Jim Comey. I've been very critical of some of his judgments. In fact, maybe a little harsh on him in terms of this firing, and perhaps I suggested it was justified. But I can tell you this, there's no question about his integrity whatsoever. That I can tell you, and I think that if this is exactly what happened and it's well documented and we have these circumstances surrounding it, I would believe what's in the memo.
So let me ask you, Gloria, politically, okay, we're 24 hours out from the report that the president shared classified information with a U.S. adversary, obviously talking to the Russians, with a man believed to be a top Russian spy in the Oval Office. You now have a White House official just telling Jim Acosta a moment ago, saying of the Comey memo, quote, I just don't know on this one. Jim's take is there was no attempt at spinning this one. Obviously, the president is denying it, but that's a pretty troubling statement for the Trump camp from their own aide.
It is, and there are other people inside the White House who are trying to put some sort of a face on this. But look, Before this story broke this evening, I was talking to somebody who's very close to a bunch of Trump loyalists who had spoken with numerous people inside the White House yesterday. And the way this person described the people in the White House to me was disconsolate. That was the word yesterday. So, and also, in talking to people who are close to the president before this story broke tonight, I can tell you that they describe him to me as a person who felt under siege, who didn't have confidence in anybody on his staff, and was kind of trying to think his way about what to do about it, because of course this is a president who never admits that he himself has made a mistake. But if you look at the past 2 days, you look at somebody from the intelligence community feeling strongly enough about what went on in the Oval Office with the Russians to talk to reporters about it, and then you look at this story today, you have people in the law enforcement community feeling strong enough about Comey to talk about this. And so you can see the president saying, oh, the intelligence community and the FBI is out to get me. But in fact, I would argue that these are people who saw something alarming and wanted to tell the story.
So, Paul, let me ask you about this, though, because this is important. The president denies it happened. Okay, no shock to anybody. But in part, his statement reads, the president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn. Okay, that's his word. Jim Comey is now coming out with a memo with quotes that he said he wrote right after this meeting on February 14th. He was obviously fired only, a week or so ago. Okay, so what happened in between then and now?
The claim.
Why didn't he put the memo out right away? Who did he tell?
Well, exactly, and I think that's the big problem you're going to have here. Technically, if what Comey says in his memo happened, I agree with Jeffrey. This is a supportable conduct, criminal conduct, which translates into an impeachable conduct. However, look at Comey's situation. He hears the president ordering him to stop an investigation. He does nothing about it. He doesn't go to Congress. He doesn't raise the issue. He just makes notations about it. His credibility, I think, is going to be harmed quite a bit. Instead, of course, Comey continues on the job. And there'll be a strong argument by Trump supporters that Trump is more believable on this than Comey.
What do you say to that, Jeff? Because there is this question, and now we're hearing there were memos at many times because he felt appalled. Well, if he was so appalled, why didn't he share them with someone?
Call a policeman into the Oval Office to arrest Donald Trump.
Couldn't he call one of these committees and go in and tell them about it?
He could have, and I suppose that is true. I mean, I think, given the context, the FBI director isn't going to, resign on the spot right away.
Why not? Why not? If the president is threatening criminal activity, why not resign on the spot?
That's a good question.
And this is a guy who's got a lot of integrity. I mean, that's always been his reputation. He has integrity. So instead, he takes the job and continues on. He's going to get torn apart on the witness stand, if there is a witness stand in this case.
Well, I mean, he will, but I mean, that is an example of putting the witness on trial as opposed to the defendant. I mean, yes, that is something that Comey will have to answer for.
Yes.
But what about the underlying conduct of the President of the United States?
If he did it, it's impeachable. But remember, the jury here is the Congress, a Republican Congress. So, they have to vote to impeach. I don't see them voting to impeach on this evidence.
All right, so
it's technically enough,
Gloria,
but
I hear
not
you
enough.
trying to jump in. Come in.
Well, I was going to say that one reason Comey might give is that he actually wanted to finish the Russia investigation, which was his job, and he didn't want it to be politicized because he thought the investigation into the hacking into an American election was just that important to the country that he wanted to finish that job. Look, I can't speak for Comey, and nor would I ever try to, but I would think that might have been a more important thing that he was thinking about getting done.
So, Tony, let me ask you, because I know you also had been in the Situation Room, Jim Comey. What do you make of this? So the fact that he would say this in a memo, and perhaps, as we understand now, multiple memos over multiple times, and at least at this time, it's unclear whether he shared it with anyone.
I've had cause to question his judgment, but never his word. And this has the feeling of chickens coming home to roost. A few days ago, the president was unleashing this sort of veiled threat in Mr. Comey's direction. You better hope there was no tape of the meeting that we had when Mr. Comey said in that meeting he'd been asked for a pledge of loyalty. Turns out the president should have been concerned that there was no memo that Mr. Comey was writing about their meeting. That's where we are now. And look, at the end of the day, the real problem is this. The president has, over a long period of time, apparently an adversarial relationship with the truth. And if it's going to be he said, I think Mr. Comey is going to come out on top in this instance.
Mark Preston, what do you say?
Well, a couple things. One is, I think Republicans, go back to the idea about impeachable offenses and what would Republicans do. I think we have to look through this through two lenses right now. Party loyalty and then loyalty to the country at this point. Up to today, so to speak, I think that Republicans were willing to let a lot of things go from the president because they thought that for the things that he did, they at least had him in office and they could get things through that they thought were necessary, okay, whether that, legislatively on big issues. However, I spoke to a Republican just a short time ago, somebody who's very sober on these types of issues, doesn't jump to conclusions, described this to me as a very critical moment right now for Republican leaders here in Washington and throughout the country. And this Republican pointed out to me, which does make a lot of sense at this point when we talk about subpoenaing and having control over oversight investigations. Yeah. The road they're on right now is Republicans will lose the House of Representatives in 2018. That means Democrats immediately have subpoena power, and they can go in and they can ask for any kind of documents they want from the administration. And what does that mean? It means that the Republicans would be in a lot of trouble on retaining control of the White House in 2020.
All right, so all of you, please stay with me, because when you talk about Congress, obviously, this is going to come down to whether it can be proved what Jim Comey says happened. If so, right, then you're down the path of they could pursue impeachment for obstruction of justice. At this hour on Capitol Hill, there are growing calls for Jim Comey to come and testify and tell his full story. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer just moments ago said this on the Senate floor.
The country is being tested in unprecedented ways. I say to all of my colleagues in the Senate, history is watching.
Manu Raju is out front. He's on Capitol Hill tonight. Manu, what are Republicans saying right now?
Well, Aaron, there are very few Republican defenders of this president right now. Most either want to see this James Comey memo, want him to testify publicly, as Senator Lindsey Graham told me earlier, suggesting maybe even a special prosecutor could be warranted if he feels that the president did anything inappropriately based on James Comey publicly testifying, and others concerned that the president continues to distract from what Republicans are trying to do up here. Now, just moments ago, Aaron, I talked to Mark Walker. He's the chairman of the Republican Study Committee. This is the largest conservative faction in the House. He said that he's concerned also. Take a listen.
If that's accurate, I don't have any reason right now that it's not. I'm just hearing it from one of our staff people. To say that we would have some concern would be accurate. That would be troubling. For me to act like it's not a concern would be remiss on my part.
Now, this comes, Aaron, as House Oversight Chairman Jason Chaffetz saying that he's prepared to go after this Comey memo, saying this in a tweet earlier, saying that this committee is going to get the Comey memo if it exists. I need to see it sooner rather than later. I have my subpoena pen ready. So Republicans and Democrats want to get to the bottom of this. The question is whether or not Republicans are pushed to do anything beyond the existing investigations on Capitol Hill. Will they embrace what Democrats have been calling for, a special prosecutor? But at the very least, concerns from conservatives and liberals alike, Democrats and Republicans, wanting to get more information tonight, Aaron.
All right, Manu, thank you very much. Back to my panel. Jeff, let me just put this question to you. Okay, let's just assume that Comey will give over this memo and any other memos. Let's assume that he does that.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Let's assume that what's quoted is what's actually in there.
Correct.
I think those are two fair things, that they exist and that that's in there. Okay. Then what? It's a he said. Well, that in and of itself, is that enough to cause obstruction of justice? I mean, it's one man's word versus another.
Well, you have to look at the surrounding circumstances. It's not just the memo. Will Sessions and Pence confirm that they were asked to leave the room? That would corroborate what
and they could
Comey
be subpoenaed and come in and testify on that very matter.
And they certainly will be asked publicly about it as well. There are lots of cases that involve differing versions of the facts, and juries are ultimately designed to make those credibility determinations. I think if one person has contemporaneous, that is, written at the time, records of what went on in a conversation, that's usually pretty good evidence. But this is a political situation. Impeachment is more a political event than a criminal event. And
so there is no beyond a reasonable doubt or any such thing that would need to be proven at this point.
Absolutely not. And Democrats Republicans are going to just have to make a seat of the pants judgment.
Yeah.
Is this something we want to force someone out of office about?
So, Chris, let me ask you, because this is now leaking to multiple news organizations that Jim Comey had these memos, okay? I think we can make the assumption Jim Comey knows that that's leaking, and he's okay with that. There's been plenty of leaks coming from his camp in the most recent days. So, is he going to come out and come on the record himself and testify the way that they want him to now in Congress?
Yeah, I think they need to give him a forum to do so, and the sooner the better. They should do it warp speed. Bring him. I generally have minimal respect for congressional investigations. There's more politics than there is investigating going on. But this is the perfect forum. You don't launch right into impeachment. Hold some hearings. Bring Jim Comey in there. Let him bring his memos. Let him testify. Let's find out what happened. I'm getting real tired of hearing from third parties and secondhand information. I want to see some firsthand information.
I agree, but also, I think that you are absolutely right that it's not time for newspaper articles, it's time for testimony, but you have to get underlying documents as well. Are there any documents that shed light on what went on in this meeting, including the Waves records, which are the records of who was going in and out of the White House on February 14th, and of course, are there any
They've said they don't want to share records of who's coming in and out of the White House, but that's almost a separate...
Just let me add one point on the bind that Comey is in. Because Comey, ironically, may wind up being forced to be on Trump's side in this scenario, because he's going to have to come in and say, well, if I thought the president was asking me to obstruct justice, I would have either resigned, or I would have gone to a Senate committee, or I would have gone to a House committee. He's in a really tough spot, because for him to endorse the idea that this was, in truth, an obstruction of justice,
he has to
say that he was complicit in the obstruction.
Yeah, Gloria.
There was enough reason for Comey to memorialize this. He didn't memorialize it because he had an interesting conversation with the president that he wanted to recall for his memoir, I assume. I assume he did it as a matter of record because he found it worrisome and dangerous. And so,
but then why not say something earlier, Gloria? Why wait until he's been fired?
Well, I think that's a completely legitimate question. And, I was just guessing before that maybe it's because he felt the Russia investigation was more important.
Right.
I mean, we'll have to wait for him to say why he didn't go to oversight, or why he didn't go to the White House counsel, or why he didn't go to the Attorney General, right? I mean, well, he might not have been confirmed at that point. I'm not quite clear on the timing. He will have to answer that question, but it's very clear to me that the reason he did this is because he found it worrisome. I mean, why else would you memorialize a conversation